right, so today we're going to talk about how to work with your shapes in Illustrator. The first thing that we need to talk about is the arrangement and how shapes function or objects function in Illustrator. So right now, even though we're working with black shapes on a white background, you can see that where these overlap, they look like they're all kind of taking up the same space, but instead they're sitting on top of each other. So you need to keep track kind of where your shapes are in relation to other shapes. So I've kind of color coded them so that you can see that the magenta square is sitting on top. The black square is sitting in between the two, and then the magenta square or the cyan square is sitting in the far back. So you need to understand this in regards to some of the tools that we're going to be using today in terms of how they're going to overlap. So let's say, for instance, I'm working with this shape and I need to bring it forward. I'm going to go to Object, Arrange, and say Bring to Front. Now I know that this shape is sitting on top of this shape, which is sitting on top of that shape. This is important in a couple of the tools that we'll be working with today. So you can always use the key commands. You can also use command and then the bracket keys, and that will allow you to bring things forward or backward depending on what you're wanting to do. Or you can always just select a shape, go up to Object, Arrange, and then say Bring to Front, Bring Backwards, so on and so forth. So the first tool that I'm going to talk about today is going to be the Pathfinder tool. We're going to use that to kind of cut shapes out of other shapes, kind of combine shapes in some different ways. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to have a shape, make it a little bit bigger. And there are two ways of approaching this, although I think you'll explore and find some really fun things to do with the Pathfinder tool. So right now what I'm going to do is I'm going to click a shape, and I do need to be aware of what's sitting on top of what. So right now you can see that actually gave me a little bit of trouble because this shape is sitting on top of that small circle that I brought over. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go up to Object, and once again I'm going to go to Arrange and say Send to the Back. And now when I hover over that circle, it's really easy to kind of grab onto. So these two circles will be sitting on top of that square. So I could, in theory, just change these to white. But there are some creative things I think we'll have a lot more fun with if we're playing with how that works. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select all the objects that I want to combine or kind of work with. And over in the properties options over here, you'll notice about 2/3 of the way down is the Pathfinder. You also, if it doesn't show up there, you can go to Window, and then you can also go down to Pathfinder as well. So it's available in some multiple areas. I'm going to drag this out just so you guys can see that option. So the first one that I'm going to do is minus the front. So, and this is why I was telling you about the arrangement of your shapes. So I know that those two circles are sitting on top of the square. So I'm going to say minus the front. And you'll notice just really easily and quickly, it just punched those two shapes right out of the other one. The other thing that we can also do, and I'm going to change the arrangement of these just so that you can see what's going to happen a little bit better. And we'll do something a little bit more complex so that you can see some different things that will happen. So that option was minus the front. You can hover over them if you forget. The other thing that you can do is you can kind of select all your shapes and you can combine them into one shape. So this would be unite. So you'll notice that like I've lost that circle now, and this kind of is its own shape now that I can move and I can manipulate and do different things with. The other thing that I can do, which I think will be a lot of fun for the project, is an option for exclude. So we'll see what that looks like when I do that. So you've got these three different options that you can work with. You can unite your shapes together, you can do minus the front, and then you can also do exclude, which will kind of take away from where they overlap. We'll talk about some different reasons that you might want to use one thing over the other. So that's one thing that you can play with, and you can do it with anything. So you'll notice I'll go over here and I've got my organic shape, and I'm going to bring it to the front just so I know that it's sitting on top. And some of you might be doing some things where it makes more sense to make this white and kind of manipulate it in some different ways. It might be that you still need to scale it or play with it in some different ways. Whatever is going to work best for kind of your creative process is totally up to you. I am going to select these, and the same thing, I'm going to change this back to black just so that you can see what happens. I'm going to select my two objects that I want to combine together, and then I'm going to say minus the front. You'll see I achieve a similar effect, but now it's all contained within that shape. The other thing that I could also do, which I think could be kind of interesting with this, Once again, I'm holding down shift when I'm moving my objects around. And this one I think will be really quite interesting if we do exclude. So you can see that that's really starting to play with what's positive, what's negative. And it's doing it in a really fast, quick way instead of kind of having to spend the time to do this by hand. So, and then the other thing that's really quite nice about this, I'm going to move my circle or my square out of the way. We'll play with a circle. This could be really interesting. So now I'm going to make sure that this is sitting on top. Arrange, bring to front. I'm going to select the two things. I'm going to do exclude, and that's pretty interesting. The other thing that's really nice is once you do exclude, you can also go in and you can manipulate your shapes even farther. So let's say that I like how this looks, but I don't really like this shape. I can double click into my isolation mode, and I can click and I can kind of drag some elements out. So if they're connected, you could also go in and use the eraser tool too, and you can see I left some things there and I can just go ahead and delete that. So don't feel like you have to keep it exactly the way it does it. It might be that you go in and you kind of manipulate it in some other ways. Pathfinder I think will be particularly helpful, especially when you guys are working with reversing out your sections. And I would suggest just starting that idea with your rectangle tool. And of course, this might change depending on kind of the shapes and the things that you're interested in. So let's say that you want kind of a lot of that kind of black background. I'm going to make sure that I send it all the way to the back. And then as I place my shapes on top of it, I can combine and play with it in some different ways. So let's say I want to do this. And a lot of this is going to be experimentation, to be really honest with you. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select all of this. And I know that that one shape is definitely sitting in the background. And so Unite's not really going to do a whole lot, but minus the front wheel. So you notice I've kind of punched those shapes out. And then also exclude could be really cool too. It's mostly helpful down here for these little bits and pieces. And then of course, if we preview it, we can get a sense of like what it would look like without kind of those elements bleeding off of the edge. So this is how you'll be able to reverse sections out. And of course, now you can see all of this is kind of connected. So if I resize it or change it in any way, we don't want to squish that. But you can see that's changing everything at the same time. But I can always go back in and double click in isolation mode and then manipulate pieces and parts that I want to. So like, let's say that I really want that to kind of be at an angle. I want to kind of play with that, what that looks like. And then some of you might really find it much more helpful to kind of work with individual pieces that you just change to white. So there's lots of different approaches to this, lots of different ways to kind of manipulate it. The Pathfinder, I think, will be a really great tool. You'll use these three. You'll use Unite, minus the front, and then you'll also be using exclude. So these are the three that we'll be working with in class, and will give you a lot of freedom to kind of manipulate your shapes.